Well, the python problem is getting closer and closer to home here in Central Florida. We told you at 10 how the apex predators are getting closer to our home here.
Florida didn't mean to uncover this. The plan was simple: stop an invasive predator that was tearing the Everglades apart. Quietly, with no headlines, no public attention, officials approved an experiment so strange it sounded fake. They released artificial prey into the swamp, designed to think like an animal, feel like an animal, and die like one. At first, it looked like another expensive failure. Millions of dollars disappeared into murky water. The machines were destroyed. The predators adapted, and the Everglades did what it always does. It refused to be controlled. Most people would have shut the whole thing down and walked away. But buried inside that failure was something far more disturbing, because the experiment didn't just attract the pythons. It watched them. It learned from them. And without realizing it, Florida scientists uncovered a hidden system guiding every move these snakes make. A secret map of fear, timing, and survival that had never been seen before. And once that map was revealed, the entire war changed. The Burmese python didn't invade Florida on its own. This wasn't some natural migration or slow creep across borders. It was a mistake, one humans didn't notice until it was already irreversible. Back in the 1980s and 90s, exotic pets became a status symbol. Tiny, beautifully patterned baby pythons were sold as harmless curiosities, advertised as manageable, even friendly. What buyers weren't told was how fast they grow. Within a few years, those cute hatchlings could stretch longer than a car, strong enough to crush bone without effort. When owners realized they were sharing their homes with something they couldn't control, many made the same quiet decision. They released them into canals, ponds, and wetlands, hoping nature would take care of it. Then Florida made it worse. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida, flattening neighborhoods and ripping apart reptile breeding facilities. Cages shattered, power failed, security vanished. No one ever counted how many pythons escaped, but they didn't need to. The damage was already done. The Everglades had just been seeded with a predator built for this exact environment. Warm water, endless cover, prey that had never learned to fear a giant constrictor. For the python, this wasn't survival, it was domination. With no natural enemies and the ability to lay dozens of eggs at a time, their numbers didn't grow, they multiplied, quietly, invisibly. And by the time scientists realized what was happening, the ecosystem was already collapsing from the inside out. Because the real danger wasn't the snakes themselves, it was what started disappearing next. By the time officials admitted how bad the problem had become, the damage was no longer theoretical. It was measurable. Entire species were vanishing, not slowly, but almost overnight. In parts of the Everglades where pythons took hold, small mammals didn't decline, they collapsed. Raccoons, opossums, marsh rabbits, gone. Some populations dropped by more than 90%. Animals that had survived hurricanes, droughts, and human expansion were being erased by something they didn't recognize as a threat. They didn't run, they didn't hide, they never stood a chance. And the destruction didn't stop there. With small mammals wiped out, birds of prey began to struggle. Snakes, foxes, and scavengers lost their food supply. Even the soil changed as carcasses went uncollected and decay patterns shifted. This wasn't just a snake problem anymore. The entire food web was unraveling, strand by strand. So Florida did what it always does in a crisis. It turned to people. The state launched public python hunts, promising cash prizes and bragging rights. Airboats flooded the swamps. Flashlights cut through the darkness. For weeks, the effort looked intense, aggressive, hopeful. And when it ended, the final count told a brutal truth. They had removed fewer than 100 snakes out of tens of thousands. It wasn't a solution. It was theater, and everyone involved knew it. Because no matter how many pythons were killed, the swamp stayed quiet, as if nothing had changed at all. That's when officials realized something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't effort. It wasn't funding. It was that humans were hunting blind. After the public hunts failed, Florida abandoned the spectacle and went professional. This time, no cameras, no crowds, just paid specialists working the swamp night after night. The python elimination program put licensed hunters on levees and canals, scanning the darkness for movement. They were paid hourly, with bonuses for every snake removed. On paper, it sounded serious, targeted, relentless. But the Everglades doesn't care about paperwork. The numbers were brutal. Millions of dollars went into the program, yet the impact barely registered. For every massive python pulled from the water, another seemed to take its place. The swamp was too big, the snakes were too well hidden, and most of the time, the hunters were reacting instead of controlling anything. So the state tried to get smarter. They began using what were called Judas snakes. Female pythons were captured, fitted with radio trackers, and released. The idea was simple: follow them and they'll lead you to others. Sometimes it worked. Hunters found breeding pairs, nests, clusters they would have have never located on their own. But even this had limits. The signals went quiet, the snakes moved unpredictably, and tracking a few animals didn't matter when thousands more were moving unseen through grass and water. It was like trying to drain the ocean with a cup. That's when wildlife managers admitted the real problem out loud. You can't fight an animal that doesn't want to be seen using your eyes alone. And that realization pushed them toward a hunter that didn't rely on sight at all. If humans couldn't see the pythons, maybe they didn't need to. That idea led Florida into unfamiliar territory. Instead of relying on flashlights and tracking gear, wildlife officials turned to something far older and far more reliable: instinct, specifically smell. The experiment was quiet, almost secretive. 2 detection dogs were trained not for drugs or explosives, but for a scent no human could register: the faint, musky trail Burmese pythons leave behind as they move through water and grass, a signature that lingered long after the snake itself had vanished. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, looked like a family pet. Eleanor, a Dutch Shepherd, was sharp, intense, bred for precision. For months, they trained in controlled environments, learning to lock onto a smell that meant nothing to people but everything to them. When they finally entered the Everglades, the results shocked everyone involved. Snakes that had evaded crews for weeks were suddenly being found in minutes. The dogs didn't search randomly. They followed invisible lines through mud and sawgrass, tails stiff, noses low, until they froze. And when they did, handlers knew something massive was nearby. Flashlights would sweep the water, and slowly, scales would emerge from the dark. For the first time, it felt like Florida had an advantage. But the Everglades has a way of punishing optimism. The heat was relentless. The terrain shredded paws. Alligators and venomous snakes turned every search into a calculated risk. The dogs needed cooling vests, boots, constant monitoring, and even at their best, there were only 2 of them. 2 dogs against 1.5 million acres. It was a breakthrough, yes, but not a solution. And that small victory sparked a far more unsettling question. If scent could find the snakes, what would happen if the swamp itself called them in? That question pushed scientists into territory most people wouldn't dare. If scent could track a python, could scent also lure one? Could prey itself, alive and irresistible, be used as bait to bring the snakes out of hiding? The first attempt was shocking in its simplicity. Live marsh rabbits, the python's favorite meal, were placed in secure enclosures deep in the swamp. Terrified but unharmed, the rabbits trembled as the snakes approached. And approach they did, one after another, massive constrictors drawn to the scent and heat, striking at the cages with precision. The principle worked immediately, but the moral cost was undeniable. Images of quivering rabbits surrounded by massive snakes sparked outrage. Animal rights groups called the experiment cruel. Public pressure skyrocketed. Funding was pulled. The project was shut down. Live bait was no longer an option. But the idea had stuck. Scientists had proven one thing: the pythons couldn't resist prey cues. All that remained was to build something that looked alive, smelled alive, and even felt alive, without risking any real animals. From desperation, innovation was born. Engineers and biologists began designing the first robo-rabbit, an artificial decoy capable of fooling one of the deadliest predators in America. Every detail mattered: body heat, scent, subtle twitching movements. It had to be perfect, or the experiment would fail before it even began. And when the first units were deployed, the Everglades reacted in ways no one could have predicted. At first, the robo-rabbit seemed like a miracle. Cameras triggered, sensors pinged. Massive pythons, some over 15 feet long, approached the decoys, licked their tongues, and struck as if the rabbits were real. Teams moved in, capturing snakes that had eluded hunters for months. For a moment, it looked like humans had finally outsmarted the swamp. But the Everglades has a way of refusing control. On the 3rd day, one alert came in from a decoy near a deep water canal. The biologists expected a python. Instead, the camera revealed a massive alligator charging from the shadows. In one violent lunge, the gator crushed the $4,000 robot with a single bite. It didn't stop there. The robots weren't just attracting pythons. They were luring every predator in the area. Alligators destroyed dozens of decoys. Pythons, learning to avoid the machines, stopped approaching altogether. What seemed like a brilliant solution quickly became a fiasco. Millions of dollars, hundreds of hours, gone. Or worse, creating chaos in the swamp. Predator wars erupted unintentionally. The project had failed spectacularly, or so it seemed. But even in apparent failure, the robots were quietly gathering secrets. Every movement, every attack, every hesitation was recorded. Every destroyed decoy left behind a trail of data no human had ever collected. And that data would soon reveal something no one saw coming. What no one one expected was that the robo-rabbits had become something far more than bait. They had become spies. Every decoy was equipped with motion sensors, thermal cameras, and transmitters, silently recording every creature that passed by. Pythons, alligators, raccoons. Every movement, every pattern, every reaction was logged in minute detail. And when scientists began analyzing the data, something extraordinary appeared. The snakes weren't moving randomly. They were following hidden highways, specific corridors through water and sawgrass that led from one hunting ground to another. And the alligators? They were using the same routes, but in different patterns, always avoiding one another until prey was nearby. For the first time, humans could see the secret life of the Everglades' top predators. Patterns emerged that no human tracker could have noticed. The timing of movements, the preferred routes, even behaviors designed to avoid danger. And then came the AI. The data from all 120 robotic rabbits, both the ones destroyed and the ones untouched, was fed into a powerful learning system. The AI began detecting patterns, predicting python behavior, not just where they had been, but where they would be at specific times. It discovered a rhythm based on fear, on avoidance of alligators, on survival strategies honed over generations. The robots hadn't just failed, they had hacked the invasion. They had unlocked the hidden schedules, the secret habits, the invisible defenses of one of the deadliest predators in America. And armed with that knowledge, everything was about to change. Once the patterns were exposed, the entire strategy flipped overnight. Hunters stopped waiting for pythons to make mistakes, they started intercepting them. Using the AI's predictions, teams moved into the swamp at precise times and locations, places the snakes believed were safe. The hidden corridors became ambush points. The so-called python highways turned into dead ends. Instead of finding one snake every few nights, hunters began encountering multiple animals in a single operation. But the real breakthrough came when the system focused on the largest females. The AI learned their routines, when they moved, where they paused, how they avoided alligators while protecting their nests. Following those signals led hunters deep into areas no human had ever searched intentionally. And there, buried beneath water and sawgrass, they found them. Massive breeding sites packed with eggs, thousands of them. In just weeks, more pythons were removed than in the entire previous year of traditional hunting programs. Not because humans got better at tracking, but because they finally understood how the snakes thought. Fear, timing, and avoidance had been controlling the invasion all along. The robotic rabbits were gone, crushed, destroyed, written off as a failure. But in the end, they did something no trap ever had. They forced the pythons to reveal themselves. And that leaves Florida facing an uncomfortable question. If this worked once, how long before the snakes adapt again? That question is what keeps scientists uneasy, because this wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. The pythons weren't defeated, they were outsmarted. And nature has a habit of adjusting when it's cornered. The same intelligence that allowed these snakes to spread unseen across South Florida could eventually help them rewrite their patterns all over again. What makes this experiment different is what it proved. Not that robots can save ecosystems, not that AI can replace hunters, but that the Everglades itself was never chaotic. It only looked that way to humans. Beneath the surface, there was order, rules, fear-driven logic guiding every move. The robotic rabbits didn't end the invasion. They exposed its blueprint. And now, Florida's standing at a crossroads. Double down on technology that learns faster than nature adapts, or risk falling behind a predator that has already surprised everyone once before. Because the moment the pythons change their routes, the map goes dark again. And if that happens, the swamp won't warn anyone. It will just go quiet. What began as a desperate experiment turned into something far more unsettling. Florida didn't defeat the pythons by overpowering them. It did it by watching, listening, and learning how fear itself shapes survival in the wild. The robotic rabbits were never meant to last. They were crushed, torn apart, written off as a failure. But in the process, they exposed the hidden order beneath the chaos, a system of movement and avoidance that had controlled the invasion from the very beginning. For the first time, humans weren't reacting to the problem, they were anticipating. Still, this isn't the end of the story, because the Everglades is alive, and so are the predators within it. The same adaptability that allowed pythons to dominate once could allow them to do it again. Technology bought time, but time is all it ever buys. The real question now isn't whether Florida found a solution, it's whether nature will allow that solution to last.